Hi, and welcome to an episode of the Jet Rails podcast. I'm Robert, your host. For those that are joining us that caught our last episode with Ben Marks, our guest of the day, this is a two-parter. So you're going to want to go back and catch part one, which was all about total cost of ownership in the e-commerce world. But for this episode, we're going to be talking here in part two about what I'm going to refer to as open source versus SaaS. But in the last episode, I think Ben had some better ways of framing it because there are different ways of slicing and dicing and categorizing different e-commerce platforms. Ben introduced himself a little bit in the last episode. You're going to get to hear a lot more about him. And we're definitely going to talk a little bit more at some point in this episode about shopware and what's cooking there, where Ben has hung his hat. But with no further ado, let's dive right in on this particular topic. So, Ben, how is it that you would want to frame, if we want to look at some of these different platforms, it is open source versus SaaS and e-commerce a good way of breaking it down, or do you think that there is a better way of thinking of it?
You know, it's a way. I have this theory that in programming, probably in lots of things in life, but certainly in programming, when you're making architectural decisions, there's sort of this Newtonian physics that applies that, like, for every advantage has an equal and opposite disadvantage. It's really just a matter, it's in the eye of the beholder. And, and I think that applies to platforms and platform decisions, and it bubbles up into the e-commerce space, right? So we have this kind of unified law of Newtonian advantage and disadvantage in our world. So the thing that might be advantageous, to a merchant, under these circumstances would be, just the diametrically from them is someone for whom that would be a tremendous disadvantage. And in that regard, you can see sort of open source and SaaS, or you could call it, and maybe it's a little more constructive to call it, closed and open. I think, unfortunately, closed has a negative
connotation,
and open has this really nice positive connotation. But
but we spend more of our time on the open source side of the fence, so we could probably get away with that.
And you could qualify it as sort of like a closed source versus open source platform and platforms. And multi-tenant solutions are obviously closed source. And platforms like shopware are open source and open core.
So I think that's a fair breakdown. There are a lot of differences between some of these platforms. At the tail end of the last episode, we were talking a little bit about community and some platforms that have been historically have done amazingly at that, like Magento. And some that have been up and coming in more recent times. I still love seeing what's coming out of the Magento community. I just recently taped an episode of this podcast with Andreas from IntegerNet talking about the Hoover theme. Yeah.
Yep.
And, just very insightful, and seeing the innovation that's coming out of the community, to me, is just as important, if not more important sometimes, than what's happening at the core. Because as a silo, a platform can be good, but in e-commerce, it takes a village. It's shipping and taxes and payments and front end experience, this, that, and the other thing. Reward points and loyalty and gift cards, and I can go on and on and on with all the different things that come together to really deliver a solid experience for everyone, both in terms of the customer experience and in terms of the operational efficiencies, the back of the house stuff. So, from your experience now, and I know that there are platforms like Shopify that in a lot of cases have been eating their own ecosystems by competing directly in category after category. It's a big topic unto itself, but Have you seen a difference overall in communities between open source and closed source platforms?
Well, they don't exactly invite me to Shopify events. Now, I think I did hang out. Well, I was gonna say last year, the last real year. I was hanging out at IRC and with some of the big commerce team, who I just think are wonderful. Um, Even if I didn't recognize the CEO at first and asked him what he did.
Oh, poor Brent. Now,
Yeah.
he's one of the sharpest tacks in the industry. So
Yeah, for sure. So wait, sorry, what was the question again? I totally got lost in the moment there.
that was what I was going for. I like to ask meandering questions. So it was really community, open source, closed source. Is there a difference, or is it just up to individual situations?
It depends. I mean, I think the role of the OEM plays a strong part, but it's there. Maybe there's a continuum, but maybe a continuum is even a wrong way to think about it. Like a way of looking at there's actually, so Magento has a rich history of ecosystem epochs to like go through, or to consider. So the eBay days, right? So 2011, the acquisition closes up through 2014, early 2015, when Magento was spun out as part of eBay Enterprise. Those are kind of the dark years in the Magento ecosystem, because this organic, like free range ecosystem that's sprung up all over the world, created on its own, the Meet Magento imprint, all these things that just happened. Well, like that ecosystem survived a period when the OEM got completely distracted by eBay priority to kill Amazon, which maybe a little misguided. And total focus on, if it wasn't enterprise, that no one in the office, practically no one in the office really, had any responsibility for it or care for it, because everyone was looking at enterprise stuff. So that ecosystem carried itself forward. And then another moment you actually just mentioned with the introduction of Hiva. So what one guy did, Willem Wigman in the Netherlands, working for Internet, and under the auspices of Internet, created this. He walked through on a I think it was the most recent Reacticon from Jesse Reitzman, walked through his whole process of basically why can't I enjoy Magento development? Why is it so burdensome? Why is it not possible for a single capable developer to build, to be in a freelance Magento business? And he is a smart enough cookie that he was able to break down the problem and start piecing things back together. Boom, a whole new line of business exists. And how friggin' timely was it? Because now Magento Enterprise is Adobe Commerce, and it probably doesn't. It's not too far a stretch to see that this certainly signals a major shift in priority. At least a public acknowledgement of the shift in priority for Adobe as it goes to the Magento open source platform. And if I'm a merchant, again, looking at a platform, and I need to look at its ecosystem as part of that TCO risk calculation, what is this ecosystem, going to do? The basic things are there enough people to do the work? Are there people who will, help that platform find its way and continue to prioritize the merchant and their customers, who, by the way, are the most important people in the room? Literally, without them, none of this happens. The spice does not flow. So
don't send me back to Arrakis, please. I'm not mining any spice.
So there you go. If I'm a merchant and I'm taking a chance on something like Magento 2, and I think Hiva is the difference between open source being something, I'm not going to say done, but a very different thing in a couple years than it would be otherwise. I think Hiva is a really positive development in and especially the Magento open source space. And I'm really excited to see what comes out of it. I mean, I think it's going to mean that there's more competition, between Magento and Shopware. So it probably makes my job a little bit more difficult, but I'm going to give credit where credit's due. And I'll be thankful for that competition. And I'm certainly thankful for an ecosystem that had given me so much and prepared me so well to absolutely take over the world with Shopware.
Hey, what I've already seen, having attended the Shopware Partner Day and other things, is that there seems to be demand, and there seems to be enough to go around. So more power to you. And thinking back to your early days, because all of us that got involved in Magento at one time or another, and other platforms, had different experiences trying to break into those platforms, and had different experiences, whether that was as a developer or as an agency or a marketer or a business owner, trying to get educated, trying to get good information, trying to move things along. You were among the very, very first team members at Blue Eggcorn, if I remember correctly.
The first.
And, there you go. And so at that point, when you started touching Magento, where would you turn for answers?
Yeah, it's a challenge. So I don't know the parallels as they exist to like a BigCommerce or a Shopify. I mean, the nice thing is that they're a lot more directly in touch. They had a much more restricted domain at the same sort of step in their growth. Like, okay, we've just launched, and wow, this thing is kind of taking off. But they have a lot more control over that experience and understanding and insight into how people are building shops and how the customers are shopping. But in the Magento world, yeah, it was like, you had a product company, Varian, creates a product and then puts it out there and says, yeah, this is an open source thing. And open source, there was huge pent up demand for it. So they adopt it and it just explodes. But they built the thing. I think they built the thing the right way. But what was really missing was this like primer. And I don't know. I think it was mostly an issue of resources. Like they just did not have the people to create the documentation and be able to prioritize and deliver on education. So, which is unfortunate because what they did was they built a Java-esque PHP app, and for even experienced PHP developers like myself, I all of a sudden I'm over on Martin Fowler's, Java enterprise like website. So I'm looking up like, what the hell is a front controller? And then once of course, in retrospect, it's like, oh, this all makes sense. And this is why like Java developers make great Magento developers. If you can keep them happy. So we had to go to the web. But there really wasn't anything on there. It took the pioneering work of like Inchu out of Croatia, who had some really sharp developers who were figuring some things out, and of course, the grand poobah of it all, Alan Storm, who was sharp enough and also entrepreneurial enough to realize the value of. It was actually, I don't know, maybe entrepreneurial is not the right term. I mean, I think he's consummate. Curmudgeonly programmer, all about sharing knowledge, but saw that there was some brand value in sort of digging into Magento and explaining it and figuring out like making it relatable for PHP developers who were new to something quite so complex. And then also there was the IRC, the room on IRC on Freenode, the Magento channel. That's where a lot of people like myself really got the help that we needed. Is where I met my good buddy in the Magento and Shopware worlds, Vinay Kopp. And through that, I think a lot of people outside of Germany and the Netherlands discovered, what open source culture is, what it means to be a participant, like an active participant, responsible participant in open source. So Those were the early days, but I think that was a great foundation on which to build. And I think it was a shining example for Shopware, which was still proprietary. I think still closed at that time. But eventually Shopware realized that open was the way forward. I think it's especially true when you have an industry that is subject entirely to the arbitrariness of how people want to buy and sell shit to each other. There are just myriad ways, and there's layers and layers of conflicting, dials and levers, and because of this, and that changes as you go vertical to vertical, region to region, country to country. And because of that arbitrariness, you engage. I think you engage a chaos machine with another chaos machine, and just and the system organizes itself around that. And thinking about like the one true way to solve all commerce just doesn't work. You just simply say, hey, we're going to put these two systems together. You could think about like galaxies colliding. And then on a long enough time frame, then they're going to just reorganize. And what you get after the fact is you have these hotspots of ingenuity. You have these ecosystems, these like minor ecosystems of business, flow of dollars, flow of knowledge, and that's how it all moves forward.
And I think, one of the things for me that stands out maybe as a difference, because, you're going to have on both sides of the fence, open and closed source agencies and different tech integrations, maybe more in some categories for some than others because, of things like, a Shopify payments or something that might conflict with having a wider community around certain features or integrations or functionalities. But back to that, having these message, boards and chat systems, and now, now everybody's in Slack and all these other things. Having communities get together. I love hanging out in the Magento community forum still, and I think part of what I found in the Magento ecosystem was this willingness to identify a problem and for the community to come together around it to solve that challenge in a unique way that I think is sometimes, because in the SaaS world, there are going to be apps and things, but there's a limit. I've watched a lot of companies, whether companies like Shipper HQ or Bolt or others, that wished that they could bring their full technology suite to SaaS, but couldn't because closed source. And things couldn't integrate the way that they could with an open source platform. So those users just couldn't get certain options, for their e-commerce shoppers, and couldn't leverage certain tech. And then I think part of it comes back to maybe some of that, for me, just, an open source community that's willing to write code and submit it, often for no monetary direct quid pro quo, for no direct payment. People that are willing to sit around and contribute back to a community where they feel empowered and lucky to do that in some cases, versus closed source, where typically there's a very set roadmap from the platform, and there's a little bit less of that community now. They have a vested interest in meeting the community where the community wants to be met if they want to continue to thrive, but there's, I think, some intrinsic differences in how individual developers and individual members of a community on one side of the fence and individual companies can interact in an open versus a closed environment.
So yes, that does exist, and on a closed source platform, it really is more and more on the OEM to facilitate interconnectivity. Like the health of a platform ecosystem is not indicated by the relation of the vendors and actors to the platform. It's really the interconnectedness of all of those ecosystem members, right? And it's a bit also about the flow in and flow out of that ecosystem. But I can't, but that's where at some point though, people do awesome things adjacent to their, adjacent to the platform that they're involved in. I mean, the example I always go to is like Kelly in the Shopify world is Kelly Vaughn at Taproom. What she and her team do. So, Kelly's doing, Kelly does an impossible amount of stuff. And I think I just saw on Twitter, they're on a road trip, but she just bought 2 domains and we know what that means, right? So she's going to do more stuff. I don't know how total respect for entrepreneurs who can run a business and get all these other things done. But, Kelly's constantly, she's part of podcasts. She's constantly putting, a stream of advice out there. And I think any good platform will have these wonderful personalities who come in and will do things, and it's just kind of however much they're facilitated within that ecosystem, they're kind of that shapes how much of what they do, for the benefit of that ecosystem, is directed inward or, outward. And from what I've seen, with, fully acknowledging my selection bias, from what I've seen, the open source ecosystems can be tremendously welcoming, present a fantastic level of opportunity to go from like, I'm new here, I have no idea what's going on, to 6 months from now, hey, I've got a certification, to 2-3 years later, hey, I've got my own agency, or tech vendor, SaaS platform, whatever the case may be. I mean, Karen Baker, like, let's look at the Karen Bakers of the world, who transcends, she and web shop apps and then Shipper HQ transcend even platforms. Started in, and we should probably get this related back to TCO as quickly as possible, but started, basically building an extension for a friend with a Magento shop, and then participating in the forums. And then, years later, we see where they are. But if bringing that back to the TCO, to how this matters to merchants, again, underscores the importance of ecosystems, because it's not just the activities of the platform, right? It's not just like, oh, hey, we're throwing a partner day. Hey, we're having a conference in this region. It's what are we inspiring our ecosystem members to do, and what are they, more importantly, inspiring each other to do? That's how you end up with things like Pre-Imagine, the party that just the community organized on its own ahead of Imagine, or any of the the meetups that happen in all the myriad places. Like, how much is this being facilitated just by the culture of an ecosystem? Because the health of that ecosystem is absolutely a factor that merchants need to think about when they're thinking about the platform that they choose. And that especially speaks to the long-term horizon for their investment and their choice in a platform.
Yeah, I will tie it back in my own head still a little bit to there being a slight difference. I don't know how slight really, but between an ecosystem that is working together on code and bringing things together just more naturally as just a base layer of how they operate, versus something that I think is more holistically commercialized. One, there's, I think, more camaraderie, and the other, it's not necessarily that, that the opposite. But I don't know that, from my experience in working with some of those platforms, while the ecosystem may be welcoming, I don't know that there's always, outside of one-off integrations between vendors and things, that there's always quite as much camaraderie, quite as many reasons to come together around certain issues. So I think that's not necessarily what the merchants experience day to day, but I do like the thought about, as a member of the community, whether you're a developer or sitting in this seat or that seat or what have you, the overall health, the overall outlook, that we invest a lot of ourselves, a lot of our time, into these things. And it's nice when it leaves you with that natural high. When it's something that you're excited to be a part of, Now, when you're part of something that's making a lot of money for you, et cetera, hey, that's something to be excited about for most people too. So it's not that it's all about one thing or another, but I've certainly seen where I've tried to work with platforms way back when where it was miserable. And I would, never, it's like, you touch that hot, pan once. You remember the burn a little. But coming back to open, closed, maybe a quick level set, the 30,000 foot view, there are a few things that are pretty different. In one, you're more likely to have more ownership of your e-commerce website, and the other, you're more toward, leasing. It's multi-tenant. You're renting it. You don't necessarily have as much control. There are certainly sites that get shut down in these multi-tenant environments day in and day out, for whatever reasons, myriad of reasons. So I think that there's that base level of, this is mine versus I'm a user here, kind of like being a seller on Amazon. There's a spectrum, I guess. You've got that where you're just a seller on someone else's site versus another where you're paying to use a platform where you have a site, but you're renting.
Yeah. Well, look at the vendor lock-in is a hell of a drug, right? To quote the dear departed Rick James. Or paraphrase. So vendor lock-in, I mean, again, advantages, disadvantages. I mean, if your horizon, if you don't expect vendor lock-in to be a factor for you, well, then you can completely dismiss it. But vendor lock-in, it's kind of like, using enum as a developer. Like you think you've got it all right from the beginning, but then invariably you find out your assumptions were wrong. And then you've got some serious refactoring to do, some rework to do. So, I mean, are you, building the metaphor of building on rented land, or land you don't own? I mean, to some degree, when you're, no matter which platform you choose, you unless you are developing the product yourself, like the platform yourself, you are subject, to the whimsy of the platform vendor. But I'd say the nice thing about an open source platform is there tends to be a lot more involvement. Where a truly open source platform, there tends to be a lot more involvement and consideration for the market. And I could say, particularly in the shopware world, the things that work to our advantage there is it's essentially ingrained in the corporate philosophy, the culture. Also, there's, it's a bootstrap cash positive business, right? So there's no competing interest at the leadership level to make decisions that aren't in the best interest of its ecosystem, especially merchants and partners. And
you mean that after acquisitions and after taking in rounds of capital, that sometimes people want to, do things that are going to hurt the ecosystem in order to derive more profit and capital back out? That happens?
See, you and I know exactly what we're talking about. We're not going to bring it up because we're nice people.
That's right.
But smart listeners will get the inference. I mean, and the reality is, like an open source platform like Shopware and again, open source has very, very little to do with code. Code is the least interesting part of open source. It's really about the philosophy around it, and especially how the OEM conducts its business around that philosophy. And for me, I think what the reality is, market forces are shaped by all of the actors together. So I like to remind anyone in a platform world that, I don't care if you're a member of the best platform ever and you want this thing to succeed, like your destiny is shaped in part by all of the other actors in the space. And in this space, I mean, you've got, in this corner of the world, you have Amazon and you have Shopify. they swing an enormous amount of weight around, and they take up a lot of resources, and attention. Basically, a lot of aspirational merchants, they're naturally going to go there. Most of them are going to be well served there, by the way, like in a way that they wouldn't be on some other platforms, but it's still a consideration. So, I think, a challenge for something like Shopware is as we grow, as we will continue to grow, and especially as I'm working to bring us into new markets, and as we arrive in these new markets, over time, things that weren't standard parts of a platform, things like logistics, things like maybe recurring payments, like all of this stuff becomes like table stakes, becomes standard offering elsewhere. And so one of the hard challenges for any open source, open platform ecosystem is positioning everything as, hey, this is a level playing field, everyone has equal access, but then all of a sudden saying, hey, you know what, in order to actually be competitive and actually have people choose us, 2 years later, we're going to have to actually have a branded payments solution. We're going to have a branded shipping solution, because we need to be able to offer the same like reduced transaction fees, or sweetheart, discounted shipping fees as part of our platform offering. And that means you actually do have to pick category winners and losers, or at least a category winner. To say like, okay, well, you can use Shopware to do this, and then the standard offering is probably going to include some sort of branded payment solution, in some future state. And it seems to be, it seems anathema. It seems against the spirit of open source. But open source, at some point, it has to meet the reality of the market. And I think that's okay. Like as long as you can explain that to your ecosystem and say, hey, you're in this business, you care about this business. Yes, we are making this decision, but we're making this decision because if we don't, then there's no more business. Again, the spice stops flowing. Now, how this relates to TCO for especially the merchants who want to consider this topic. The bigger your platforms, like Shopify commands an enormous discount because of the volumes that they're pushing through the various money pipes coming out of the Canadian towers. And so if you're on Shopify and you want to use not Shop Pay, holy crap, do you pay a lot of money for that relative to if you can use Shop Pay? Now, also, and this is actually shaping the whole of the e-commerce landscape. Like, I know me, I have been fully committed to buying something on my phone, and I get into like, and I use Chrome on my desktop and Safari on my phone. Like, I might be buying something in Safari, I get into a checkout flow, and then I'm like, crap, there's no integration with any of the tokenized payment vendors out there.
No PayPal, no Amazon Pay, no, yeah.
Bounce. I do not feel like typing my address and digging out my card and all that stuff. So that's one of those forces that, hey puppy, that's one of those forces that shapes, that absolutely shapes the landscape. And so as something to think about from a TCO standpoint is like, if I'm merchant on Shopify, well, they've got the bully pulpit to make these decisions and to set these trends. So in that regards, they have tremendous advantage over basically any other player. But the nice thing about open platforms is they can adapt, and it depends, and you just have to make a guess about what are all the opportunity costs? What are all the things that matter for me if I'm on a closed source platform, but with the ability to really influence the market, or in the case of Shopify too, like logistics, on par with Amazon, or Walmart on par with Amazon, versus what I get, and how much I can innovate over here with an open platform, and what are the businesses that are going to spin up around all of the uncollected masses, over time.
Sure.
The warehouse, being able to do this warehousing. I mean,
Sure.
and there are vendors that do that.
Yeah, you've got your in no particular order. Ruby has ShipBob, ShipMonk. I mean, there's lots of great 3PLs and organizations that they became important, especially now where merchants used to just keep all of their inventory in many cases in one location, and you can't compete with Amazon's 1 or 2 day delivery when you've got to ship across the country.
Yep.
So just thinking domestically, at least, let alone internationally, this becomes a challenge. And then, if you want to be selling in other countries, if you want to ship cross border every time, you might outgrow that. You might need to really move some inventory across borders and things. And so, you get one side where there is a healthy ecosystem of options. You get another side where, maybe they create the offering, and perhaps there's a leg up there for various reasons. You hit economies of scale, things being negotiated, et cetera. It's interesting. Let's talk for a few moments about data. Not in a Star Trek reference, although that would be perfectly fine as well. But when I think about a platform like Magento, I think about a merchant that really owns all their data. It's proprietary. They're really responsible for storing the data properly and for data privacy. When I think of multi-tenant SaaS platforms, there are now, and there are, there are certainly, for every platform, different, data privacy, terms and conditions and other things involved. But not only is there someone that perhaps has some access, and we saw with Shopify last year that, and I'm actually proud of how that got handled, that there was an employee that was stealing data.
Yep.
And they were turned over to the authorities, and that's good. But now I think a little bit more about all the apps. With Magento, you install a bunch of extensions. Data really, for the most part, stays localized to your key systems. With a SaaS platform, I often see a lot more apps that get access to a lot more data, that if you could pick and choose what data they got access to, you'd probably lock them out of a lot of that. And in order to really get your core functionality, you often lose a lot of that ability to really truly safeguard your data. You're making accessible to a lot of companies you don't know very well. I don't know if regulation is ever going to be an issue there, or if that's just my way of thinking about keeping certain things very close to home. But I always, from a security standpoint, I wonder, if these two things are really very different, or is this just the nature of the world now that we have to trust and a growing number of third parties with all of the proprietary order data, customer data, all these things that we would normally keep very, very close to our chests.
Well, and here's actually a good topic to consider, just, sort of costs and risks and everything at the, just at an industry level. There are, it's not even beyond nuances when it comes to open and closed platforms. So yes, I mean, if you have a self-hosted platform, then, most likely, your data is staying local to you, and you can, and hopefully you're working with a capable hosting partner, and the platform. I
know one of those, but yeah, that's for another day.
Just make it run smooth as rails. And your platform is keeping abreast of and implementing the features for the various data regulations like GDPR coming out of Europe, or now the California data privacy law. I mean, there are initiatives out there. So there's like Gaia X, GAIA-X, looking at a federated data infrastructure for Europe. So this is like an interoperable, like a council for solving the problem of like disparate data regulations and the needs to like, oh, well, no, for these customers, you have to warehouse data here. I mean, we're seeing these are necessary problems to solve, but holy shit, it makes the business really, really, really complicated.
Yeah. And I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. Now we've got, so not only California, but Virginia and others starting to follow suit. And you've got down in Brazil regulation. And I think that merchants in the future I think it's fair to predict, and I try so hard not to over predict things, but that, just having all these players have access to all this data, that's going to get harder to justify in a lot of ways. There's going to have to be more thought into, even if you don't have like a chief data officer, chief privacy officer, something like that in every mid-sized organization that isn't going to task a full-time employee with that or such, but that you're still going to have to give some thought into just who's getting access to what data.
Well, compliance. So compliance costs. What are the costs of compliance? How much would these extensions, like if you're, super cheap extensions in the Shopify world, how much more would they have to cost if there weren't this sharing of data? I mean, and then a lot of functionality, if you think about, so we can again go across industry here. A lot of the features, especially intelligent features, intelligent merchandising, smart pricing, like intelligent search results. So that exists no matter what platform you're on. Those only work because these companies are aggregating all the data. And so it's in their best interest to get more and more merchants involved, to have a nice price point for them to just fill up their little lakes of data and then be able to do the work that they need to do and find the things that convert, things that matter. So it is this, our startup capital of like sort of just putting ourselves out there and just letting everyone, letting all of the data aggregators know who we are, and let the targeted ad industry fuel the growth of all of this. Yeah, that tap is getting turned off. I mean, and no one is actually looking out for us. So TCO standpoint, you have to be compliant when it comes to data privacy. You have to try and anticipate where things are going to go down the road, and how will you be compliant at that point. So something like retrospectively implementing, the right to be forgotten under GDPR for like a Magento 1 instance, what does that even look like? Versus a Shopify merchant probably doesn't have to worry about that, right? Because it's one of those features that gets rolled out. Advantage SaaS platforms. But yeah, so I don't know. That's there's a whole direction to take this. But like,
that's really interesting, and I like that that there's a plus and minus, I think, on each side for it. That there's pros and cons in either direction. That my goal for today was not to to wear any kind of rose-colored glasses or anything about one direction for another. We all come with certain inherent bias.
No. When it comes to TCO, there are only blood splattered glasses, right? It's just how much blood.
I would have settled for watermelon if you gave me a mallet, but all right, look, bloodlust, sometimes it just happens.
I was not anticipating a Gallagher reference. That was quality right there.
So, and when it comes to apps, and this isn't just the SaaS platforms, but I think that the number of apps on average being used when you're in SaaS, because you can't install plugins or extensions or what have you, is just usually astronomically higher. And depending on how strong the core platform is, with something like Shopify that doesn't have a lot of the core features that a Magento does or a Shopware does. I think
someone's looked. Sorry, I'm going to look it up while you talk.
Yeah, I think, from my perspective, all those apps bring certain security, scalability, speed, reliability issues. There are all reports every year. There's some good folks that put them out looking at the latency at the the slowdown on these websites caused by these different apps. And it's one of the things that I don't talk to a lot of people, that when they're selecting apps, that put a ton of thought into or research into how much is this going to slow down my page load. But you can really do a lot of engineering in an open platform, but when you're dealing with a closed platform, you're pretty much at the mercy of however awesome or not so great some of those apps are, that there's often a limited amount of option available to you to rectify a situation.
I just looked it up actually. So this is definitely in the wheelhouse of TCO. So according to privy.com, privy.com, the average Shopify store owner has 6 different apps. Now, average Shopify store that's a bit nebulous. And I think I don't know if that accounts in any way for like Shopify Plus. I think you would want to compare like store, merchants like me, like I am, like how many do we typically have? So they're saying 6 different apps. Magento did a survey a while back. Hopefully this is a couple of years ago. I don't know if this is proprietary, but they can dock my pay, or dock my bonus. Let's
don't get me in big trouble here, okay?
Well, yeah, no, I so I think it was, and I have no idea the methodology, but I want to say it was something, like 12 or 20 was average, and there
double
again,
digits sounds fair to me.
So how, but and which ones are being used, like which ones are sort of activated, being used versus not, like how much of that is just cruft that's gone along, and there again, you also would want to say like, what is this by region, by vertical, by merchant size?
Absolutely. Look, if you're outside the United States, you probably need different integrations just to handle payments, shipping, and other basics, let alone any extra features. And if you're a brand new startup, whether, regardless of what platform, you're probably using fewer integrations, fewer apps or extensions or whatever they are, fewer add-ons in general, versus a more established company that's integrating with all sorts of marketing systems and third-party software, and let alone adding features and having a more advanced store in the first place. So it is economies of scale. I sat in for a session from the Shopify Marketplace team. I want to say at least 2 years ago that we were already surpassing that average that Privy had listed. So I don't know how recent that article was. I like the folks over at Privy, but I know that was the case. But basically, I've actually seen the graph from the Shopify folks where when it was at 1 and 2 and 4 and 6, and there's a little bit of a curve there that's pretty straightforward in terms of the growth, because as people spend longer on a platform, they add something. At the same time, the average, you start talking averages, means, medians, that sort of thing. I mean, when you talk Shopify, there's so many small users that, are more burn and churn people, that I almost think of that, some of that segment, and even the marketing toward them, as like the next multi-level marketing scheme. It's let's set you up with a drop shipper, and you can have your own store, and you can try to sell into your own echo chamber of your social media followers and your friends and family, and so maybe instead of selling Amway or something, you've now created a Shopify store. And how many people really survive that way? How many really make it out? So there's a churn in that, but I think that there's a certain volume in that lower end of the market that's starting out on a Shopify Lite at $9 or whatever it is now a month, or a Shopify at $29, versus the more premium users, the Shopify Plus users spending thousands of dollars a month for the platform. The number of apps in use, absolutely, from my personal experience, going to be vastly different.
Yeah, that's and just as an aside, I think this is why conspiracy is such a big vertical into itself, because turns out there's quite the overlap between conspiracy theorists and their commercial opportunity, right? To sell stuff, in fact, and to actually sell stuff over a long period of time to the targets of their, or the subjects of the conspiracy theories.
Well, there was always the guy at the bar, or the pub, or whatever that had some crazy stories to tell, and that was kind of interesting. And yeah, now we're all very, very interconnected, and and the reach of an individual is very different than it might have been in previous times in history. So there's that, and I guess that moves into commerce as well. That their swag and their books and their whatever can really. Not to say that books weren't being printed and sold across all sorts of geographic locations and such, but there's definitely a lot of reach for a lot of things. It's interesting, and and so Steve, being able to grow with an open platform, I suppose as you grow, maybe you do need some of these add-ons. Maybe from a hosting perspective, maybe you need some more horsepower that you need to add some more front-end web nodes or such to handle your traffic spikes or things. That there are certain more hard costs that somebody's going to pick up somewhere as you grow as an online merchant. However, I think with an open platform, while you may pay some of the fixed cost of that, like hosting infrastructure needs, a lot of that is really pegged toward things that you have control over, versus I've seen, especially as you go further up market, toward the pluses and enterprise versions and other things in the multi-tenant SaaS world, where it's really pegged more toward a percentage of your sales, where you have kind of that silent partner there in the platform that you're going to see pretty consistent increases as your revenue goes up, even if your traffic or other metrics, bandwidth, other things don't change drastically. I find that sometimes that's a hard sell for some users that, and sometimes, I find this with the apps also that they peg in similar ways, that I've talked to a lot of merchants over the years that don't want that many partners with hands in their pockets. They don't want it to be based on their revenue. They want it to be based upon some kind of hard usage or flat fee or something that they can really get around. I think that that's often a core difference when we look at open and closed, is some of that billing model. Now, there's a middle ground of something like an Adobe Commerce that might look at some of that as well. They have more
for sure. Yeah, for sure. I mean, Shopware does not have a revenue, like a direct revenue based component. At this time, I'm not sure what our pricing, how it may evolve over time, even our enterprise tier. I'm sure because everyone is doing it, there's probably some sort of, I know I'm kind of scratching my head, like, it seems weird that if I'm a 1 million euro per year business or $1 million per year business, I'm going to pay the exact same enterprise fees that, a 100 million euro business is going to pay. But I mean, as a matter of perspective, and as a matter of like, what is it? Wow, my cost to acquire that platform, if I'm the 1 million euro or dollar merchant, it's a lot more costly for me relative to that really big company. So something that acknowledges that sense of scale seems kind of called for, and certainly the precedent is there, but also like, why it's almost like you're paying an additional tax or an additional penalty for being really, really successful.
Mm-hmm. And then there's the fear of the renewal of, what happens when, they just decide that now for this commercial product that the price is going to go up drastically.
Yeah,
because they can.
Always a risk. And that's why any sensible contract should, agreement should state like, because a platform may and likely will need to go up in costs over time, but that could be managed at the contractual levels, like saying, hey, you will never experience from year to year, you will never experience more than a 5% price increase, and over any given 3-year window, you will never experience more than a 10% price increase. Whatever that scale needs to be. That
I'm
makes
bringing you to my next negotiation. This is going to be fun.
hey, I'm game. But I also like being able to differentiate on something like that. But you can imagine, I think there are other ways to make money, and make more money as your other ways to make money as your as your merchants make more and more money. But I suspect, actually, I completely mistrust that revenue, or the revenue is the right metric, right? I mean, revenue might be part of a formula, but this is the classic challenge for just a revenue band based pricing thing. And this would be this factors into that cost of license. Well, okay, I'm fine. Two merchants both making $100 million on the same platform, but one merchant is, enterprise B2B. And so their average order value are like tens of thousands of dollars, and their margins are like, 0.1% or something, right? So they're a lot of money is flowing through that instance, but the cream that's going off to the merchant is much smaller versus this person over here who's selling plastic widgets manufactured in China and has like a 30% profit margin. Again, like how do you account for that kind of cost, or sort of that kind of pricing scheme when there's such a disparity there? But also, like, how exactly do you justify penalizing someone just because they have a better margin? These are really interesting problems to solve for, and you'd never get it exactly right for everybody. But I think we can probably evolve beyond this, this really just indelicate, blunt tool of revenue tiered pricing.
Yeah, we got some great business off of, in the hosting space, off of a competitor that was only looking at revenue. And then, and back to your analogy, so you have a B2B user who's selling large, high value, carts, and, so $10,000 at a clip. And so their traffic might be pretty stable and minimal. Get that same $100 million merchant doing, small ticket B2C, huge traffic spikes. The scalability needs are vastly different. And so, where we go through a major sizing exercise, the competitor wasn't, and, led to a lot of headaches. And so, people were offboarding from product X and coming over to us to get a more scalable solution that was right sized for them. These are the sorts of things that I worry sometimes about, some of these things like total cost of ownership being a little bit too much of the decision-making process without looking at opportunity costs and risks and other things. I think that it's a little bit similar here when you just look at a merchant's revenue and not enough at what their needs are, at what's going to best serve them if they could be successful, and the same reason that with, when we go back to Magento open source versus Adobe Commerce, will this merchant, even though they're sizable, be more successful with open source? And, whose best interest are we looking at?
Well, and applying that, going over to the SaaS platforms, what is their, how granular are their merchant success initiatives, right? Because it's in Shopify's best interest to do things that benefit, and to do activities that benefit, a majority of their ecosystem, and, individual merchants succeeding or failing, not a huge, not, they don't feel that as much, which is, I'm not implying that they don't care about that. And I'm sure there are many, many, many teams devoted to all sorts of dimensions of merchant success there.
Absolutely.
So I want to be clear on that, but, you do need to look at where you are as a merchant and look at how, maybe if you can identify some, a decent proxy for you and your business and where you want to go in any given platform's ecosystem, and see what resources are available there, from the platform itself, what resources are available there among the ecosystem members, and even add that into your mix, because your, success in this business is often an outcome born of shared investment and attention.
This is a team sport.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that and I know we've talked a little bit about community and ecosystem and that sort of thing, but one thing that we didn't touch on, thinking of that, is and back to open versus closed. With Magento, somebody writes an extension. There's an open API. Anybody can really integrate with a Magento store. And I imagine, of course, the same of Shopware. When we talk about something like Shopify, there are cases where, and I wasn't in the room, so I don't know, what blame falls on what side of the fence, but it wasn't. It's been a while now. But MailChimp and Shopify had a falling out, and then there were a lot of merchants impacted by that. Now there were some winners there, like my friends at Klaviyo, really. They did wonderfully off of that. But
I wish I could find. I see it referenced, and I've referenced it many times. And I do not know the canonical reference, but some smart person or people have observed that that as a platform grows, like as a platform becomes more successful, it tends to start eating more and more of its ecosystem, or certainly the impetus or imperative is there to eat more and more of its ecosystem. And sometimes it's necessary for competitive reasons. I mean, maybe you could argue that Shopify's jump into logistics was the only way to really was a great way to compete against Amazon or what Walmart was doing.
Yeah, I don't know that I would argue that Magento shipping really changed the direction of Magento. Probably ruffled some feathers.
Yeah, I mean, I was there in the background for some of that. I mean, that the discussions were, not unlike Magento hosting, like Magento getting into the cloud business. I mean, if you don't see these kinds of things coming, getting into hosting, coming out with a branded payment solution, coming out with a some manner of like shipping aggregation, component, like you're probably not paying close enough attention to the space. I mean, these are things that'll happen, and ideally they happen with enough consultation with the ecosystem. But there again, like it really, when you're evaluating a platform and the risks, the MailChimp example, like how much, how do you, if I'm selling blue widgets on Shopify and, Bob or Jane over here is selling blue widgets on Shopify, and we're selling both into the US market, how are we differentiating ourselves? We're probably differentiating ourselves in our, our customer acquisition, maybe in any of our retention or follow up, that sort of eCommerce, EX, like outside of our commerce engagement. And so your platform choices there become part of your TCO and your potential risk. I mean, do I think anyone should have predicted that started up on Shopify and chose MailChimp as their, provider, that they should have reasonably been able to expect that what happened? Not necessarily, but you do always have to realize that any feature or aspect that is attractive enough and can be delivered with the benefit of the economy of scale of something like Shopify, like they're going to get in that business. Recurring payments is, subscriptions was also, I think, was predictable move for Shopify. And in fact, and they even signaled it, and then it took a while to deliver on, and probably, and from what I'm seeing from people in the biz, it's still not necessarily fully fleshed out. And
I think it's left some merchants out in the cold because there's some categories like CBD and other things that had subscription offerings and such. And I don't think that going through Shopify Pay that they can use it. So there is usually some level of fallout when there's change, and that happens in every ecosystem as things evolve.
And I should be clear. I'm not throwing too much shade for, tackling the problem of recurring payments. It's hard. It's really, really, really hard. It's adding another arbitrarily variable dimension onto commerce, which itself is an arbitrarily variable.
You're dealing with storing and tokenizing credit cards. You're dealing with
customer agreements, and it necessarily involves like how that payment is authorized, right? And everyone has to know that, like, okay, this person agreed to pay under these terms on this date, and then there's an update, and then we need to figure that out. And that just
the shopper wants to pause the subscription, or they want to change it, or they need to update the credit card on it, or there's a lot of things that happen along the way in terms of communication and features. That's an interesting one. I've definitely experienced it's been a while, but my sets of challenges with subscriptions, overcame lots of them. There's some good extensions in the Magento ecosystem. There are some good SaaS providers in some of these ecosystems that I've come across now. It's not that it can't be solved, but it's not a one. There are some things where the feature set is pretty narrow. And I would agree with you. There's a good amount of different things that have to come together and make that work well and consistently.
But yeah, I mean, it is if you know as a merchant, if you know that your email marketing, I mean, pretty much all of these email marketing firms have grown into so much more, but we'll call it email marketing. Like if that's a major component of what you're doing, that's where you start to look at, okay, maybe we mitigate some of our lock-in with something like I think Redrook has iPass or Saligo, so anything that sort of wraps your functionality and means that you're not building integrations. And this is true regardless of platform. You're not building integrations directly to your commerce backend, especially when you have multiple systems that need to share information. That that's all federated, and that's going through this, through this layer that then makes sure that the right information is normalized and going in the right places.
Yeah, and that's an expense. When you're integrating third parties that don't have native integration, that don't have their own app or what have you, or you just need something more custom in the first place, you need to really transform the data along the way. That becomes really important. So, and a lot of those companies, the different iPaaS integration platform as a service providers, they're focused on ERP and accounting, point of sale, CRMs, PIM tools, all sorts of things that might not always have a native integration. 3PLs, marketplaces like Amazon and eBay and what have you. I had a stint in the space, so it used to be one of my talk tracks, right? But it's interesting to think about maybe in some cases pulling in some of these other things for multi-channel marketing or for other data sets, so that you really have this one hub that's reaching out to all the spokes, as opposed to relying on this app for this app for that. Just have it all flow through one. But I think that at that point, you're typically paying for every connector. And so for the average user who was, connecting to MailChimp for free and just paying for a MailChimp a MailChimp account, a MailChimp subscription, adding on the cost of, which could be hundreds of dollars a month or something for some third-party strong integration. It depends. Economies of scale. I think that depending on what you're integrating and how, and some of that pricing, I think will continue to, at least for certain things, to become more advantageous over time. Yep. But there's a lot of setup there. That's just an interesting topic for me always. I can conjure a lot of a lot of firsthand stories from my agency days, and then from my iPass days, a whole other set. I wonder, as you get more custom, and so that's where actually as web hosts, we host people that write custom apps and integrations that have to sit outside of the multi-tenant SaaS platforms. For some of those larger users that have to have these custom things written, and aren't, they can't just get an off-the-shelf solution, subscribe to an iPass or whatever third party, and just have it all do everything that they need seamlessly. And so at that point, I almost wonder if you have to basically come back to a web host and you have to maintain these third-party things that sit outside because you can't get the platform to do what you need in the first place, and the things don't exist in the ecosystem that you need. Would you have been better off in an open platform in the first place? Are you really getting the benefit of that multi-tenant closed platform that you were going after anyway?
Yep.
And have you gotten? And I think some of the interesting conversations that I've been having around that have more to do with the progressive web apps and a lot of the more modern front ends. Like, if you're going to start to really get into a lot of that stuff, are you getting as much of the benefit of the SaaS platform in the first place? Or are you really getting into more custom territory anyway?
Yeah. So this is, I think Mark Lewis has mentioned this many times, and I've seen it come up in other places as well. Again, when you're looking at how do you differentiate when you're running on, a theoretically more limited closed platform, that's your starting point. A main way you're going to differentiate is in the presentation, right? So what does that front end look like? And that, I think, is where there's a heady surprise awaiting any merchant or brand that says, okay, we're going to use this platform, this proprietary platform that is super, super cheap, and like we'll never have to worry about upgrades and all this other, all the other advantage there. Those tend to go out the window, and you're effectively in like bespoke or open source, like open commerce land, when you are building an entirely custom front end against a commerce back end, and it's in a couple of dimensions. I mean, one, you're sort of doing things outside of their control, and you just need to understand that that's what you're doing, and then you also need to consider that depending on how it's done, you might be locking yourself into an agency. Like, that's the really insidious dimension to consider there. And again, same is true over in the open platform ecosystem. I mean, look at how many people were stuck on, some version of Magento that fell by the wayside, but simply because they just had no hope to upgrade it because they picked the wrong shop, or they just let that installation rot. Long enough.
Looking at the other side of the coin, when it comes to headless and integrating third-party solutions, sometimes it's the solution to the problem. So, you have WooCommerce and completely open source, and you could also have WordPress, which, I'm 70% or so of the internet, right? That very prevalent, very beloved by many developers and organizations and such. And you could add BigCommerce in, use WordPress as the head, and there's a BigCommerce for WordPress plugin, and you could marry the two together. There's still, from my experience with it, some things that it's more capable of and less capable of, including things like, tracking across, the WordPress side versus the BigCommerce side for certain, analytics and ads and other things. There's some things that I think that they're still going to continue to work through, but there may be a market there that if they want to compare, okay, WordPress plus WooCommerce or WordPress plus BigCommerce, different conversation than maybe a Shopify Plus user looking at a PWA, economies of scale, economies of complexity, all sorts of things happening there. So I think that some of that conversation is still very active, and that we haven't seen it all flesh out. But I think that Mark Lewis is definitely onto something there in terms of you're getting to a point where you're really running some separate things, and there's a pound of flesh that goes along with that. There's some real strong considerations that I don't think that anyone should jump into that lightly. But I am seeing that, especially in different regions like UK, Europe, et cetera, that some of that's becoming a little bit more prevalent with some of the SaaS platforms. I think it really depends on some of the who, what, when, where, why, how. So I'm interested to see where it goes. But look, in the Magento space, I haven't seen any, including PWA Studio, any individual PWA win out yet. I think it's too early to call any of it in the SaaS space as well. But yeah, part of the, the number one use case that I recommend Shopify for is somebody that wants to be able to design their own site in a day without knowing code, and wants a site that they can be proud of launching in a day or two. And that is a great platform for that. They really, really do a great job with that. And that's not PWAs, are so far away from that by and large,
PWA was an industry, and talk about like sort of TCO, like how much are platforms distracted by, shiny things? I'm not necessarily calling PWA a shiny thing, but
no, there's good use case there. But I think that, it's still early days, and
it's early, but it's, this, we've been working in earnest in this space for, over 4 years that Google's been after this. And it's, hope, and there are some cool things coming out of it. Just some general performance enhancements. I think site bandwidth hygiene, browser side performance, like there are plenty of incremental benefits there, which I think is what helps keep that story going. But yeah, like how much, you also want to make sure this kind of matches in with or ties into the like looking at what your platform's priorities are. If they're building for an exit, then they're going to probably have to get involved in some things that don't quite, maybe not. They're going to be spending R&D and all this investing in chasing that exit, and not chasing what is best for the customer.
So back on the spectrum of, I just want to be a merchant and sell stuff like, an Amazon seller. And, at the other end of the spectrum, I want to be an innovative tech company, and I want to invest into having the latest and greatest user experience. And really, I want to be a leader in the space. And, there's that spectrum, that sliding scale that people want to be on. And I think that, for a lot of those PWAs and things, that's leaning more toward that innovator or leader of the pack side. And that's not where everyone wants to be. That's not what everyone is staffed to focus on. So it's definitely interesting. Before we get toward wrapping, because you've been extremely generous with your time. And it is very, very much appreciated. It's certainly good for my brain. I hope the listeners are enjoying. But, we haven't talked a ton about Shopware. That was from my side, certainly by design.
Mine too. The TCO discussion transcends platform.
Yeah, I think that's important. But
we have the best TCO.
See,
that's the joke.
You got the drums back there. I mean, I need you to start hitting the cymbals.
Yeah.
For me, there's no way that we're going to do justice to the value proposition of Shopware in just, a few minutes. And I knew that coming into it. But Shopware is a popular platform in some core markets, and is really, right now positioning itself around some new markets like the United States. If agencies, tech companies, others want to check out what that rollout looks like and learn about getting involved in that, et cetera, what's their best bet?
Sorry.
Should they all reach out to me, and should I be filling your inbox some more?
Yeah, no, I mean, I just, I'm part of my job and part of my just how I choose to do business. Or this business anyway, is to be contactable. So I'm easy to reach. Ben at Magenta.
Yeah, I don't want to know whose inbox that's
show title. Ben at shopware.com. That's funny. Usually I'm mixing up Shopware and Shopify's names.
Oh, did they give you Ben at? Because I know that was.
I have Ben at.
You didn't have that on day one, and I know that someone very important called us out on that.
Yep. No, it was Herbie and from our education team. He was kind enough to get that ball rolling. So yeah, I mean, it's b.marks at shopware.com, but Ben at shopware.com is an easy place to reach me. I'm also, I think, abundantly reachable, contactable on the Twitters and Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp if you can find my phone number. It's out there.
You're lucky to be, Ben number one. I got to JetRails and I was Robert number 3. That we've got a Bob and a Rob, and I just fit in there somewhere. I think we've tried to put a moratorium as best as we can on hiring more Roberts for a while, but we'll see. I mean, it never seems to hurt.
Yeah. Well, and actually, for the record, when I was at Magento, I was the second Ben, right? Because Ben Presley was there from sales. But when they finally was like, he said, you know what? I want you to have it, Ben, because so at eBay it wasn't possible. And then we were private equity. It's like, no, I want you to have it because otherwise I'm just going to get all your mail anyway. So yeah, but literally, like if you can think of a use, if you've got a reference you want to pass along, it doesn't matter, merchant, developer, tech partner, whatever the case is, reach out. Let's have a discussion. I mean, my thing is that in having discussions with people, we hopefully we both benefit. We learn, we walk away, and maybe we get to do something really cool with it. That's what I like about what I do. Awesome.
Well, thank you again for all the wisdom, and this has been a lot of fun for me personally. So for our listeners, as always, thank you for tuning in. Stay safe, stay healthy, happy selling out there, and we'll have more great content like this for you soon. So be sure to subscribe wherever you're consuming this episode today.